So in today's video, I'm going to talk about Ian Bogost's essay that we read, specifically his concept of proceduralism, but I'm also going to talk in general about how we think when we're playing video games. So Bogost, I gave you excerpts from his essay, The Rhetoric of Games, first defines play, and he says play is the free space of movement within a more rigid structure. And when you think about it, when you play Monopoly, you can't jump off the board and go rob the bank. You have to roll the dice and move your piece around the board. So there's a structure there, and it's kind of rigid. But within that structure, you can make all kinds of choices and decisions. The same is true with video games. They provide a possibility space of play. The space has been created, but there's all kinds of possibilities as you move around that space. And he also notes that, rules don't suffocate play. They're what makes it possible. So you can think of rules as restrictive, as all kinds of prohibitions. Thou shalt not. You can't move your pawn 2 spaces unless it's the opening move or in the first line in chess. But it also generates the game. So, for instance, you can move your knight a certain way, your bishop another way, your queen another way. And within all those possibilities, those generative rules, you create a game. With video games, what's involved in possibility spaces is both what you see on the screen that you're working with or in the headset, but it's also the gestures that you make as you're playing, so using the controller. And so all of these things work together to create a possibility spaces for exploring topics like war, sports, etc. So the controllers, of course, they dictate how you can and cannot move your character. You can't make moves that aren't possible using your controller. The memory of the device you're using is really restrictive in some cases if it's not enough. In fact, about the Nintendo Switch, I read an article online that said that its cartoony visuals do a good job of disguising technical shortcomings, and those shortcomings that are caused by the fact that it doesn't have teraflops of memory because it's a handheld. It has a chipset instead. The visuals here for Grand Theft Auto are just extraordinary. I really feel like I'm there in Los Angeles. But Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch, you can see it's a little more cartoony, and those visuals do actually serve the function of hiding some of the technological limitations. And let's say a little bit more about visuals. Aside from the Nintendo Switch, a lot of the new play boxes have 4K Ultra HDR. And what is that? Well, it does bump up your resolution, but even if you don't have a television that can display that high resolution, it actually changes the colors. Look at the difference here. And they say this one is more what your eye would see around noonday. That's standard Blu-ray. The visuals in BioShock are just amazing. It really evokes the film noir world, even the time that film noir was made, the 1940s, with the style of the buildings. This is Call of Duty, and of course here you're in a first-person shooter position. So you are behind the eyes of the character that you're playing. So what is procedurality? What is the proceduralism that Ian Bogost is talking about? Well, procedures are just ways of doing things. Here's the procedure for applying for your driver's license. It involves X, Y, and Z. So there are procedures for courses of action. And in the case of video games, algorithms, software, hardware, we just looked at the hardware, but software, they have their rules, and then computer scientists and the visual designers work in accordance with those rules to generate rule-bound systems. You have to learn the rules of a video game that you play, what you can and cannot do. We don't know very much about how most of the games are programmed. The only way to really sort of experience the kinds of programming that you might find would be using something like the Unity game engine and trying to create your own game. Now, software, which is for production, like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, they have rules too. I mean, you can't do anything in PowerPoint. You have to use the algorithms that are there, which are expressed as buttons that you click on. Video games have those rules too, but they aren't created for production. They're expressive. They represent models that players can inhabit. Procedural rhetoric is what Bogost defines as how video games express. They make arguments with processes, he says. So the practice of using processes persuasively is what video games engage in. Now, what are they trying to persuade you of? Well, expressive in the sense of creating a world. So their arguments aren't made through like a novel or a film or photographs. It's arguments, although they do have images, of course, and words, but the arguments are made through rules of behavior. So when you have somebody writing a novel, they write the plot and they write the characters and they design the chronological sequence that they sort of hide in the background. I mean, George R.R. Martin even made maps for all of his novels, and we have them at Texas A&M in the library. You can go see them. So they build their world and their plots and their characters. Whereas when you're doing a video game, of course, you're designing a world, but you're really authoring rules of behavior. So the rules of behavior in the world that you create is what you're authoring. So video games persuade the users that whatever they're modeling works in a certain way. It doesn't sound like a very complex argument, but Bogost uses the example of a flight simulator. So it argues, look, planes work this way. Well, video games would argue war works this way or building works this way. So Bogost gives us an example, the video game Animal Crossing. And he says it gives us a model of consumer capitalism. And sure enough, I found this story just a couple days ago on my iPhone. And it's from Forbes, which is a business magazine. And it's like, oh, this is a great game. You know, you can make millions and here's how. So it is definitely modeling consumer capitalism. I mean, that's what it's designed to do, for you to, create your fortune. Go in there and create your fortune. So in a novel, your creativity is stimulated, but it's restricted, right? Because you can't change the end of a story. You can't change what happens in Harry Potter. You can only sort of imagine Harry Potter's world and the people in it. And that gets even more restricted if you see all the movies, because then somebody else has imagined all that for you. And the rules of plot that the plot goes through this process where it conveys to you the chronological events. We piece together everything about Harry's life and his parents' life as we go through the Harry Potter series. That's the chronological series. And so the plot tries to give you hints about that. And it's a very creative act, pulling all those hints out and creating what you think is what happened to Harry and his parents. But they're really strict in a way. It's really the laws of cause and effect. I mean, Harry is who he is because his mother cast a spell while Voldemort was trying to kill him. So they're kind of strict in that way. Now, in video games, remember Jenkins says that video games embed narrative into the environment so that the gamer discovers it. And then what we're talking about here, Bogost says rule-based procedures model how something works, but you choose how to move through and understand the model. So the rules in video games are primarily generative, whereas the story rules in novels are rather restrictive. You can't change the way a novel ends. Story rules in a game are not. They're generative. Games make use of spatial storytelling and procedures of play. In fact, I read this article about The Legend of Zelda. The original one had no tutorials, no mini-map. It didn't tell you anything about what you were supposed to do. So the structure really made the game feel like an adventure. You generated the story as you went along. Novels have restrictive story rules amplified by your own imagination. Or do they? I don't know if you've ever been to a fan fiction site for Harry Potter, but there are a whole lot of people writing novels using the characters from Harry Potter and generating whole new scenes and events. The procedures for gaming the rules in Animal Crossing, Bogost said, reveal the capitalist model. Or do they? So rules are not laws, and you can create anything as long as you follow those rules. Laws tell you what you can or cannot create. Animal Crossing, for instance, has caused a stir in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong players have used the platform to stage protests. They even made the governor of Hong Kong a villain in an Animal Crossing story. When we play, we explore the possibility space of a set of rules, is what Bogost says. So how do we use game story spaces to think? Remember Ox and Caps talking about self and narrative. We tell stories to negotiate reality. The stories we create or generate in games also negotiate reality. When we're achieving something, we may be thinking about our own past or future achievements. Michel de Certeau has written an essay called Practices of Space, and he says that we project two things onto visual spaces: an opaque past and an unclear future. Well, the past is opaque because we kind of understand it, and we have to keep telling more and more stories to understand it better. And the future, of course, is unknown. So as we're playing, as we're conducting quests, as we're engaging in tasks, we may be thinking about our pasts and our futures.